A Springtime Case by Tanizaki Jun'ichirou, translated by ʟɪvᴏᴏ Tamotsu. Part 4. 3 hours or so after Tsuya and Tokubei left, the midnight hour tolled, and on its stroke Shinsuke started out, disguised as a geisha's attendant man. The Mukojima house in view was said to be found after a 6 or 7 minutes walk beyond the temple of the Akiba Jinja, and almost close upon the rice field, making it a part of the farm village of Terashimamura, and he went by foot, directing his way as he had been informed. He had been advised to come in a palanquin over a good part of the journey, which was a calculated matter of 2 long miles from the Nakacho house. However, it was his fond desire to absorb, as he went, such scenes as the towns of Edo would offer under the spell of a deep night, to permit himself this last indulgence, that he should feel deeply imprinted on his mind the imagery of this world whence he was soon to depart, never to return. A step out of the Nakacho, the place of garish lights and gaiety, the streets were shrouded in soulless gloom and silence. Not a single house that kept such a late hour. After his stay at the Tsutaya of these 3 days and 2 nights pent up in the upstairs room, vested in the cloying pleasures of unbridled orgies, Shinsuke felt himself refreshed and even revived in the sobering coolness of the breezes with which the late, deserted night breathed. As he was passing by the end of the Azumabashi Bridge, he was brought into a feeling that he was so near the homes of his old father and the man who had kept him under his protecting roof. He paused, brought his hands together in the very humbleness of spirit, and he faced far in the direction of each of the houses in turn and asked for their forgiveness, following the words of his silent prayer, "My father and Master Kinzo, forgive me, for tomorrow I go forth to meet justice." When, after crossing the Makurabashi Bridge, he had come out along the riverside avenue stretched under the canopy foliage of the cherry grove, a waning moon of copper hue, hollowed out into an arching crescent, hung high overhead, mirrored on the face of the wide stream, as if foreboding an evil it alone knew. He came to a halt to pause a while before the sight of the black water moving on its hushed and sluggish course, and now to gaze at the stars arrayed over the open sky. At rare intervals, roofed dinghies carrying belated fares to the Yoshiwara came straggling, now by 1 and again by 2s, and glided their furtive way up the deserted watercourse in the direction of the Sanya Canal. And now, what could be the plot that Tsuya had on hand in concert with Tokubei, he mused, wondering. So young, yet her nerve. Such words that Kinzo brought back from his visit to the Nakacho, the estimate in which the profession of the place summarily held Sonokichi seemed to draw upon him in the light of truth. It had been his rueful thought that he could have lived on with Tsuya as man and wife but for his murderous crimes. Yet, should the gossiping case yet be true, he could not have wedded her all the same, though he should have kept himself stainless. As he tried to reason out these things with himself, it seemed to make it easier for him to abide by his decision. Turning over such a train of thoughts in mind as coming from his aggrieved mind, he followed the path down the bank of Mukojima. The officer's country villa at Terashimamura was easily found. He was not exactly unprepared when he heard the place styled as the country villa of an officer of the Shogun's guards. Nevertheless, he viewed with surprise what was possible to be seen of the estate, which appeared imposing in the darkness of night, the premises enclosed round by a wall of closely wattled bamboo laths, with a hedge grown closely behind it, altogether bespeaking the preposterous circumstances of the owner. Through a space at the door of the postern gate he peered, and saw that the door admitting to the ground plot in a corner of the kitchen was left open, 2 or 3 feet, even at such a late hour, to throw but a faint glow of light, but not to sound of voices. "I come with the greeting of evening from the geisha station of the Nakacho," he announced himself as he stepped in through the gate, the closing panel of which he found unbolted. "What brings you here from the geisha station at this hour?" demanded a man with the appearance of a servant, who stuck his head and a lantern out of the open space of the kitchen door, trying to scrutinize him suspiciously in the light thrown upon the late caller. "Well," and Shinsuke gave an awkward laugh for an apology, "I was sent to fetch ฏᴏᴏᴏ. "What? To fetch ฏᴏᴏᴏ? I'll slit your dirty mouth for saying that," the man cut in with his invective speech. "So, you're one of the gang too, but you just came too late. Your game is up already. You thought you were going to make an ass of our master and get away with a nice pot of money, didn't you? Well, you have another tune to sing this time." Taken by storm, Shinsuke paused, speechless and aghast, lost a while in a vague confusion of mind when suddenly angry voices were heard way back within the house. "Oi, you call me a swindler? Is your head as empty as your purse now? You wanted the girl and gave her money, and now, bah, you call it a swindle? Blast the tongue that babbles it." It was clearly Tokubei that was giving vent to his outraged mind. "Now, our game is spilled out. I'm not going to squeal or mince my words. We did have, yes, you were right, a little thing between me and Tokubei here, and we were going to fleece you. And now listen, Ashizawa-san, if you were fool enough to be taken in, you just own yourself beaten and take it gamely if you are a man, and say no more about it. But if you are so sore that you can't act in that style, or haven't sense enough to do it, why don't you suit yourself with your trinket knife or pike or anything else? Let me tell you that you're not going to get back your money. I don't care how much it is. What I have is mine, and will stay so. That's said." There came now a spell of stillness within the house, a hush that might be likened to the calm before a storm, broken only by the clear, ringing voice of Tsuya, who went on with her taunting in all the steadiness she seemed to be possessed of. A few more fleeting moments, and Tokubei's howling rage. "You pulled out the sword, you miserable penny soldier. Don't swing your trinket so you chop your own noddle." Tsuya's voice was raised in a shrieking yell. In the same moment came noises of a violent scuffle, as of 3 or 4 people hurling themselves into struggling confusion. Smashing against the screen, heavy thudding upon the floor, the sharp clash of blade against blade. A moment yet of suspense, suddenly followed by a shrill cry of pain. As suddenly, almost, Tokubei came running out to the kitchen, his rotund face covered with blood. Close upon his heels darted Tsuya with her hair loose, only to be stopped short by an officer who had grabbed her by the collar from behind. She was jerked into a crushing heap under the sword swung up overhead, ready for an instant blow. Without a word or cry, Shinsuke sprang upon the floor from his place on the kitchen ground. He wound his arms round the officer's right hand. "All your anger is just, but she is not to blame. Spare her life, I beg." "Who are you?" the officer asked as he turned to look, lowering the weapon. He discovered there a man with features of clear-cut, handsome lines, clean-shaved, about 34 or 5 years of age, dressed in a Habushi-tie silk suit of dark russet color, and a sash of black velvet, altogether an appearance of neat respectability. "I am a page sent out from the Nakacho to fetch back ฏᴏᴏᴏ-san. Be what it will that has brought things to this pass, you are a man of too honored a name and position. Please, be lenient and save her, and your good self from unnecessary scandal." I pray you to put that sword back in its sheath. You shall be spared this night, thrusting her up, Ashizawa said, and the money, whatever it is, you shall keep, for I shall call it a separation fee, and never let me see you again about here. Posh, see you again? Not likely if you begged me, you clown. Tsuya hurled her abuse back at him with bitter hatred. The footman was missed and was looked for in vain. There was only Tokubei squatting on the threshold, his wounded head between his hands, groaning in his agony. In addition to his head, he had suffered deep cuts in his upper arms and another across his thigh. Not like a man of strong nerves and grit that he usually was, he twitched and writhed like a moribund heap of flesh. Tsuya, he called, gasping in a faint voice. My wounds are serious and I'm losing so much blood. I'll never pull through. That dog, Ashizawa. Get Shinsuke-san to help you and hack that miserable dog down for me. Take vengeance for me. Don't be silly. What a song you sing with only those scratches. You will disgrace yourself. That rascal of a servant seems to have gone off somewhere. No time to lose. Get a hold of me, and we shall get away before the officers show up. Tsuya took Tokubei by the hand, and, in a manner none too soft or sparing, lifted him stoutly to his feet, putting his arm across her shoulder. The mention of officers was an instant alarm to Shinsuke. Should he be caught on the spot, all his explanations would not clear him after the preceding cases of the misdeed he was no party to. Yet he could not think of leaving the two in the lurch. He rallied to aid Tsuya. Between them, the pair dragged Tokubei to his feet, hauling him by the shoulders. They half carried and half led him as they started off, soon breaking into a run. Taking a deserted path along between the parsed-in walls of the mansions and the rice fields, the three had run on for 5 or 6 minutes when they crawled into the shadow of some shrubbery growth, to snatch a while to recover their wind. Fortunately, there were no signs of their being tracked. Shinsuke took a hand towel out of his bosom and, ripping it into strips, bound the wounds which were still profusely bleeding. For all this you're doing for me, Shinsuke-san, I am grateful to you, said Tokubei, who sat crumpled, leaning on the lap of Tsuya, who sat over the edge of the road, and his voice carried a depth of feeling. Just get me back home and I'll be saved, and I shall owe my life to you. Look, Master, are you sure you are steady? Do you think you can manage to walk? Inquired Tsuya, after some time of rest, and her voice was full of kindness and heartfelt concern. If you can't walk, we two will carry you on our shoulders. Just get up and try how you can go. Oh, I am well enough now, he answered, labouring to his feet, only to totter on his knees. He barely caught himself against her arms again. Listen, man, I can see you're in no shape to go, but why should we let you suffer so long when I could give you what you need and speed you on to hell? A sudden sweep of her arm, Tsuya took the reeling man by a cluster of his hair and hurled her whole weight upon him, who went down crushed, heavily thudding on the ground. She flashed out of her sash folds a razor, carried there concealed, and swung it over the upturned face. Barely in time, he met her hand. Straining what mortal strength left in him, he turned his body and threw her off. As soon as he was up on his feet, "If I must die, I'll take you along too," he snarled, and rushed for a counterattack, swinging his carving knife. What with the suddenness of it and the blinding darkness, Shinsuke was quite helpless to think of aught but to mope in his dismayed confusion about the two bodies in a deadly grip. While in this aimless agitation, his groping hands felt out Tokubei's neck, cramped somewhere between her feet. Instantly, he wedged in his weight and pulled them apart. "You are with her to get me, I suppose. Come, you dog, get me if you can," said the wounded man, and now, in fiendish desperation, came upon Shinsuke, who, however quickly, wrested the weapon out of his hand. In the meanwhile, Tsuya pulled herself up to her feet and brought him down by sweeping his feet off to the ground. Again, there ensued a fierce, closed struggle. Wounded as he was more than her match. She was at last pinned down, flat on her back, hands closing around her neck to choke out her life. A particle more of strength left in the wounded man, and she would have been dead straight away. Tokubei's strength had carried him thus far, but no farther. Suddenly, he felt himself sapped of force. "Come, what are you doing, Shin-san?" Tsuya called out for help, straining her half-choked voice. "He's killing me. Don't you see here is our chance tonight? Finish this, Tokubei. This dog's dying anyway, and Impines will be free. No more bother, you as well as me. Never a better chance to crack his head. For heaven's sake, come and get him." Even while she went on to shriek out her appeal, her life seemed fast sinking. Her voice grew fainter and ever fainter until every second threatened to cut it short once and for all. "Fiend, you! Oh, I'm choking! Help me, Shin-san!" Her voice was good yet for that another shriek. Scarce had she spent out her breath before Shinsuke drove the knife, the spoil of a moment ago, into the back of the man placed astride her fallen body. Little worse for the blow, the other shot himself into his arms, kicking, battering, biting, ripping with nails in frenzied rage. Shinsuke did not experience such resistant force when he killed Santa or the boatman's woman, nor were they always on their feet. Rolling and tumbling, dragged in dirt and pulled by hair, the two men fought on what appeared a fight of neither men nor beasts. It was after some moments that Shinsuke, almost by chance, buried his knife into the flabby side of his foe. "Here, Tsuya, I die, but my curse be on your head." With this outburst on his lips, Tokubei gave a convulsive shudder. In the same instant, a second blow was sent through his heart. One sharp whine of pain, hanging yet on the other's arms, he stiffened. "What of the curse of a gutter rat? Serves you right, too," said Tsuya. "It's the third one I've killed. I am damned. For heaven's sake, die with me now," Shinsuke said when he had shoved the corpse off, having freed himself from the dead man's clutch. His jaw sagged in an uncontrollable tremble. "What talk, man? If that's what you do, what's the sense of killing this man? You have gone down deep enough. Why not stay there and take all the good things coming your way? Who will know this thing if we keep our mouths shut? Why, this chicken-hearted idea. Come, you back up. I don't want to die. No, never." Shinsuke was no longer in possession of his own mind. That he had played straight into her hand he saw, and yet, in the face of all that, he now allowed himself to lapse from the resolution which he had so assiduously hugged for 3 days past. "So then, you'll do that for me? Oh, how happy!" cried Tsuya, and in her wild exultation she danced about, lastly flinging herself against his chest, blotched over with bloody clods. Shinsuke, who had gathered himself into a stony lump like a dead body, in an attitude of deep thought, was now left alone and aside as Tsuya set about to dispose of the corpse without his aid. At a first thing, she slipped her hands into the bosom and pulled out a purse holding 100 ryō, which, in her words, the dead man would not need for his trip to Hades. All pieces of clothing carefully peeled off were done into a tight roll, bound up with a piece of string. It was her idea to take away from the spot any and all things that might serve as evidence of the crime. As a last thing, she took the razor and cut the face of the man all over, who was finally buried in the mire of the paddy field. The remains were now beyond any possible recognition, should a chance to be discovered. More unfrequented ways were carefully picked as they turned back for the Nakacho. Late that night, the two fugitive figures crawled into their home. Part 5. Search for the whereabouts of Tokubei, made at large and at length by his henchmen, had proved quite fruitless. Ashizawa admitted to the inquiry that he had wounded the man, who, however, took to his heels with his two companions. Tsuya's account was that the three of them, while fleeing in fright of officers' possible pursuit, lost one another on the way. He had not been seen since then. Even if he had made his way out of trouble, she opined, there would be a very little chance of his surviving the wounds he had suffered. Abiding in their luck, which was little short of the devil's own, the couple had neatly pulled the wool over the eyes of the world. Nothing more to check them, they plunged into a life of gaiety and laughter. Her methods were oft subject to whispered comments, and yet the name of Somikichi continued to rise in fame. To the girl at the zenith of her career, life seemed to be a cup never to be drained. One morning, about a month or so after the night of the last murderous deed, the front lattice door of the tsutaya was opened and admitted, on a voice of a morning greeting, a caller who was of all callers the least expected, Kenzo of the Nari Hiracho. Shinsuke, who was just then seated over a brazier and a bottle of drink for his morning repast in the adjoining room, sped upstairs the instant he caught the sound of his voice. A parley ensued downstairs between Tsuya and Kinzo. "I know no man of that sort," she retorted, insisting on her ignorance in a manner that was more brusque than it was tart. "If you will say he is not here, I am not going to waste my time or yours about that. When the man himself is disposed that way, it would do him little good, even if I got him by forcing a search through your house. So, I'm going to say to you a good morning, but here is something, Somikichi-san, that I'd wish you tell to this man Shinsuke, should you fall upon him by any chance. Tell him this straight and right, please, that my word is always good. I would never break what was sealed with a true man's words, even if he broke his part of the promise. He can put himself at ease, because nothing will ever leak through my lips. But tell him that, if he wants so much to live, I want him to live straight and right, not to disappoint the man who trusted him, not to do anything that means cropping his own life, in a word, to change himself into a new man. I think he's been doing little good since going away from my place. I wish he would take himself in hand from this on at least, and turn his back upon the way he has been following. It's my honest wish, and you will tell him as straight from my heart, just to oblige this old man. My regret for taking up so much of your time, and my wish for a good day to you." And Kinzo took his leave. "Shin-san, it went off fine." Tsuya came upstairs, proud of the way she had dispatched the matter. But when she found him glum and cheerless, she suggested, "If you are so worried, what of doing away with that old man too?" "Thought of it myself, but to kill him, that man of all men, I think God's vengeance would be too heavy." He shook his head, heaving a sigh. It was a fact that his mind had become, these days, a prey to haunting ideas, wherein the killing of a man and the taking of his money invariably loomed prominent. The men and women whose lives were welded in much blood and crime seemed to feel themselves alive only to affirm the sense of life, without new stimulation of bloody intensity. He could not cast his eyes on a man's face, but he conjectured a vision of the same being laid low in a hideous corpse. He could not overcome the ominous presentiment that there were yet to be one or two more lives to be dispatched at his hands, somehow. Just about this time, the business of the boatman Seiji began to bring him into the professional life of Tsuya. What with his thriving business and with unaccountable earnings of illicit description, he prosperously carried him on all the year round. A new house had replaced the old. He had won his way into recognition as one of the opulent folk of the Takabashi way. Having attained such circumstances of fortune where he commanded homage and civility amongst his own numbers, with little fear of Tokubei, who was dead to all appearances, only too ready to feel anew the old fire that he neither lived out nor forsaken, and not without obvious reasons, he took it upon himself to wait upon the pleasure of the woman who had knowledge of his dark secret. Perhaps no more dragged by his guilty conscience than spurred on by his freshened gusto, he sought patiently to please and win her over, though he found her whims and fancies quite costly. Nursing a design in her heart from the start, Tsuya's reception of the man was calculated, never to be discouraging or cold. He was to be led on and be made to dance to her music until she should be ready to cast aside his fleeced remains after he had been trained to her satisfaction. If all that sweetness you tell is true, I can't deny that it warms up my heart toward you. But while you are with your Ichi-san, I couldn't quite relish the idea. It was the refrain with which she would always parry his advance beyond a certain point. Ichi was the boatman's third wife. She herself had been a geisha in the Yoshicho quarter until 2 or 3 years ago, when Seiji brought her out to be kept as a mistress. On the death of his last wife, he took her into his own family. Not a woman of so much attractiveness, she had nevertheless an uncountably strong hold upon the man. Moral slips on his part, or any little thing suggestive of such an eventuality, if smelt out, were sure to expose him to a connubial tirade, often accompanied by a muscular display of much vehemence. However strongly he might covet Tsuya, the idea of driving out this woman seems to be the one thing he was never likely to buckle himself to. Little difference if the old woman was with me, he would say expediently. Why, there are a lot of ways, so she would be never the wiser. To such, she would retort, if it suits you, it won't suit me. If you love me truly, there is to be no other woman, and no wife but myself. If her thrust thus driven home to him was meant as an idea to thwart him, it was as effective as it was intended to be. Listen, Seiji-san. You say you are in love with me, but you don't know what you talk about, do you? If you love me so much, why shouldn't you make a quick work of your woman who is wise to your doings? At last, she saw her chance on one occasion and pushed her argument thus far. A man like yourself, who would kill Shin-san in cold blood, who had no fault except he loved me, wouldn't stop at a little thing like that, would he? It's Santa's work, and I had no idea in it. By the way, you've become a woman of wonderful mettle nowadays, and no mistake either. On this expression of startled admiration, he dismissed the subject, but he appeared to have allowed his mind to be considerably swayed by her pregnant words. A little more time, and Seiji and his woman shall be caught in the same noose. We will settle our old score with him. For such were the words oft-whispered between the loving pair, as they found themselves alone in each other's company in that room upstairs in the Tsutaya, to sweetly enjoy those hours of bedtime. They would yet await their chance, and they treasured their hopes of vengeance. At each of his workaday passages to and from the house, by day or at night, Shinsuke's mind was scrupulously employed not to expose himself to a sight a whit more than necessary. Their chance came at length in July of the same year, when the summer was at its height. Through the arrest of one of his gang, a series of convicting cases had begun to be brought to light against Seiji, driving him to the decision that he should shut up his house and sneak off into the country where to lie low in hiding for some while. This should be his chance to do away with Ichi, and this would be done to clear the way for them, for he wished Tsuya to accompany him on this flight into his life to open anew. He would, of course, bear away all the money on hand. It was suggested that they should steal away by boat under cover of night. When this was whispered into her ear, Tsuya gave a ready assent, forcing down her heaving bosom. The 4th hour of the night, a few days after the Buddhist festivity on the 15th of July, was set for the time of dispatching his woman Ichi and their departure from town. The day before the appointed night found Seiji all but completed in his preparations. His hired hands, many in number, had been discharged, furniture and household sundries all sold off. Not a soul or a thing remained, save his wife Ichi, whom he assured he would take as his sole companion on his flight. To Tsuya was sent a message that she should walk in by the kitchen entrance at the stroke of the 4th hour of the night, as Ichi would be removed by that time. Having reassured herself of Shinsuke's part of the concert, alone and covering her face partly in a wimple, Tsuya walked in through the kitchen door of the boatman's house, sharp at the appointed hour. Here I am," hailed Seiji, who was discovered in the back room, standing in the light of a sleep-room lantern, a figure gaunt and drawn to its height. Lying at his feet with 2 hands outstretched and stark was all that remained of his woman. "I'm just through with it. A heap of trouble she gave." He was still fighting hard for his breath. "What does she look like? Let me take a peep." Mistress of the situation, she calmly fed up the wick in the oil and looked down into the woman's face. Presumably because of blood having been sent up to the head upon strangling, her complexion looked fresh and pretty as in life. An expression of agony that lingered over her features appeared as if it was trailed into the whisper of a mirthful grin. Her eyes, fixed in a soulless glare on the ceiling, were the only objects of grim terror. "There is the boat already out there. We'll take this carcass along and sink it down somewhere in the offing. Now, about money, here's what I've raked up." Seiji almost dropped before her a weighty-looking bag of straw matting, in which there were 500 ryo in gold pieces, he explained. In this moment, the door at the kitchen entrance was noiselessly opened for a second time. Shinsuke stole in. "Seiji-san, my greetings to you after such a long time. I'm obliged to you for all that you've been doing for my Tsuya." "What? You, Shinsuke-san?" Seiji's face instantly paled. Before his eyes loomed forth a man now uncovered of the hand towel in which he had come concealing his face, dressed in a light thing of blue and white, a sash of blue stripes, his glossy hair combed fresh and neat. Though now presented in the attire of loud colours and garish patterns, much after the taste of a sporting man, it was no other than Shinsuke himself. "You said it right. I'm the same Shinsuke at your service, though perhaps a thing or two wiser than when you used to know me," and be it my pleasure to report to you that both your wife and Santa were killed at my hands." A brief altercation led straight away to a scuffle. Without a weapon at hand, Seiji was soon at bay. Tsuya's arm swiftly shot out from behind his back and clapped fast over his mouth, about to cry for help. Shinsuke was given sufficient time to complete his work. The bag of 500 ryō that they brought back from the celly was lavished in their orgies of reckless abandon and cleaned out toward the close of the same year. Their hideous love had now spanned over a full year's time. I really wish something nice were drifting our way soon, or we'll be wishing each other a pretty sort of new year. A pretty sorry sort of new year, they would oft whisper between them in such a complaint of fortune as it kept sinking lower and lower. However, there was nothing forthcoming to bring them a smile or a windfall. There was but one course to be reckoned with, and Tsuya followed it with a vengeance. She brought into play the best that was in her against the men answering to her siren call, and her terms of a capitulation were of relentless vigor. The love of Shinsuke for her grew more intense as he sped farther downward. Her explanation that she had been at the old game again was good enough as far as it went, but some nights when her return home was late, he would strike out in the expression of his mind, tinged with veiled mistrust and chafing with jealous fears. "What am I to do with my baby boy? Can't you see how deeply in love I am with you? It doesn't seem possible that I should ever think of another man, does it? If I were to suit you like that, I might as well kiss a goodbye to my business." She would invariably dismiss it as if his case merited a little more than a flippant laugh. However, the case of the woman who was oft late to come home had to go still farther. For now, she would fail sometimes to return before the morning, keeping him awake all night long. In face of anything he might say from his mistrustful mind in such events, she would remain in supreme composure, unembarrassed. There were so many twists and turns to the geisha's business, and she must be wise to them if she expects to do well. Especially when she has irons in the fire, it is more than likely that she should have to act, and act in many foolish ways, sometimes pretending she's too drunk to hear the man or to wait on his pleasure, and sometimes she has to keep this make-believe up until the next morning. It's all part of her game, and a girl who isn't capable of that gets the worst of it, to say nothing of fleecing a billy lamb. This she would hold forth in her effort to confirm her faith with him and the chastity of her conduct. A man of an unsuspecting, frank turn of mind, though with gruesome records against him now, Shinsuke had scarcely initiated himself into the inner knowledge of that peculiar world of the geisha, which, for all appearances to the contrary, was really bound fast to an accepted code of honor. What he knew of the geisha or the world she lived in was through Tsuya only. For all his occasional fits of jealousy, therefore, he would always end by his complacent acceptance of her reassurance. It began to seem that Tsuya stayed out overnight more frequently. What was more strange, she never came back from such absences, but that she was ready, with a full account for the night, going as she had never done before into such length and detail in offering her explanation, all the while her bearing betrayed a restive, uneasy mind. One who was of a suspicious bent mind had laid to her charge that hers was the manner of one trying to keep to the self a happiness that was almost too uncontrollable. One night she came back in a very bad condition, leaning against the shoulder of a guest who escorted herself to the house door. "Shin-san, this is the gentleman who's been very good to me, the best master I have in business now. He is not quite a stranger to you either. Now, come out and make up with the gentleman for what's gone before. and thank him much for me." There lurked in her tone a trace of a note that was spiteful. The man who was announced as her master was the same Ashizawa, the officer who was remembered for his deadly fight with the late Tokubei. The impressions Shinsuke had carried away from what little was seen of him on that night was but confirmed now that he was brought face to face with the officer, a man in proper attire of the honored class, handsome features and lines of refined delicacy, an air of dignity about him that graced his profession and compelled respect of others. So this might be the man in the case, Shinsuke thought instinctively. "Shinsuke, my greetings and my wish to you that we should consign our memory of that night to the stream of oblivion, and we should be agreeable with one another. You shall be a welcome guest at my country villa of Terashimamura, and you should accept my invitation when you are so disposed." And Ashizawa's thin lips, associable with sharp wits, curled in a slight smile of benevolence. He was seen in a condition scarce better than his escort. Whilst the flames of jealous anger were consuming him, Shinsuke thought he should hold himself in check and silence until he should fall upon conclusive proof. Imprudent charge would but give her a chance to make him ridiculous. He was now bent upon catching her red-handed. After continuing his work for 1 month, secretly tracing her moves every night, gathering gossip from tea-houses through bribing young ones serving a 2 years' employment, Shinsuke was able to confirm himself that he had not erred greatly in his first surmise. However, all that he had procured so far was naught but indirect information that had taken him little way beyond where he was at the start. He had worked in vain to grasp such a chance as he needed. Tsuya, so sure of her own self and of his docile mind, would never fail, on her return from calls, to carry it off on each occasion with superb confidence, glib of tongue and full of the memories of people and places that were conspicuous for their absence. She would freely talk of this master and that guest, comment now on one tea-house and again on another, but her time was really spent only in the company of Ashizawa. As Shinsuke began to see it through the veil she managed to draw over his eyes, exasperating because done with self-confidence that was well-nigh a taunt, Shinsuke found himself yielding to the passions of his outraged heart until he could bear the situation no longer. In the evening of the 3rd day of the new year, though acting on such weak evidence as he had as a result of his investigation, he brought her to confront the shafts of his examination. "Now that you speak of it, I might as well tell you. I see you are improving, though perhaps you don't know it. You haven't lived all this time with me for nothing." Where he had anticipated a downright denial, she flung her retort straight to his face. Her eyes were vivid with stinging scorn as she went on. "It is a fact I have sold myself to Ashizawa, if you would have it that way, but, Shin-san, if you expect to have a geisha for a sweetheart, you ought to be wise to the game and don't fool yourself about it. I may be as good at those things as many others, but you can't expect me or anybody else for that matter to manage to put it over for hard cash by only palming off sugar pills to them. If I didn't tell you everything straight and open, you ought to have seen what's what, all the same. And if you knew that I was doing all this not for the love of the thing, but for you, your comfort and pleasure in life, you ought to be saying to me something nicer than that. It's for you to keep your eyes and mouth shut. Now that we are at it, I may as well open your eyes now as later. There were times when I gave myself not only to Tokubei, but to Seiji too. If you didn't know it, that means no credit to you." Her taunting abuse thrown to his face, Shinsuke flew into a rage. Had it been but a matter of broken faith, the chastity of her body, he might have forborne and reconciled himself to the truth of it. In none of the words she uttered was seen a trace of truthfulness. Her real intention was, to all appearances, that she should drive him into a passion and, once a wedge was driven in between them through this idea, should turn her back upon him and go her own way. "It's no credit to me, and you are right. I never thought for a moment that there should be such rottenness in your heart, and now, take this for deceiving me all this time." Swiftly, he took her by her hair, at the back of the head, brought her down under his knees. His head flew to a clothes hanger lying nearby. His blows were many, and none too sparing. Even the while he dealt out punishment, he became conscious of a sharp feeling of desolation, as of a child forsaken by its parents rising to fill his heart. That his examination of this night should come to this dismal abomination had been quite beyond his ken. Where he had hoped to take her unawares, he found himself confronted by the other even more prepared in mind than he himself was. What was he to do should she leave him now? But his mind refused to be harrowed thus far. Beat me as much as you want. I do really love that man, Ashizawa, as you supposed. For a long time I've had enough of a dolt like you. It was not a taunt that he was not exactly prepared for, nonetheless. Flaunted to his face with such open boldness, it stunned him. He was so stunned as to relax in spite of himself his hold on the rod. Gone too far beyond his help, the thought darted through his mind, and he was assailed by an unbearable and abject misery. I am sorry for what I said, and I say no more. Never will I worry you again with my foolish thoughts, so forgive me, and smile again. Think of me, of us, I beg you, and love me as you used to. Shinsuke repeated himself to such effect time and again, and he went on his knees before her, his head bowed low. To which insistent entreaty, Tsuya's answer continued to be one and unchanged. I have to take care of myself too. Give me a couple of days or so to think it over, before I know what to tell you. The case of what was known as the killing of Otsuya took place 2 or 3 days after this. Generally, a woman of stout heart and dauntless courage, Tsuya seemed to have lost her grip on herself, and stood in strong dread of the worst that man might dare at the last. She had therefore carried on her preparations in the dark. On the 3rd day, late hour in the night, she betook herself from a party at a tea-house and thence effaced herself. Shinsuke, who had been on the alert, did not neglect to keep himself informed. When he was informed at the call station of a departure from the house, he set off at once for Mukojima. On the riverbank of Mukojima, near the gateway to the Mimegure shrine, she was overtaken and dragged out of the palanquin. Tsuya held back his arm, and with a gesture of prayer said, "For mercy's sake, Shin-san, let me see Ashizawa-san 1 second, before you kill me." She fled about to elude and dodge the slashing blows, the while she kept calling out for help. And it was the name of Ashizawa who had lastly claimed her heart that she went on crying, even unto her last.